Good evening, citizens of Portsmouth. I want to welcome you to our meeting today, and I welcome my colleagues on council to our public work session. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Barnes, Mr. Battle, Mrs. Lucasberg.
Here.
Mr. Moody.
Here.
Dr. Whitaker.
Present.
Mr. Woodard.
Here.
Mayor Glover.
Here. Ms. Chapman, ma'am, would you please proceed with your items?
Greetings, Mayor Glover, Vice Mayor Barnes in his absence, members of City Council, and the Portsmouth family. Our first presentation will be by Mr. James Wright, our engineer, and he will be presenting on the Virginia Clean Water Loan Fund. This matter will come before council for a vote in January 2023. One bond is for stormwater projects in the amount of $2,574,741, and another bond is for wastewater projects in the amount of $5,741,007. Mr. Wright, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm here to give you an update on Virginia Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund. So, the Virginia Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund provides low-interest loans to local government for planning, design, and construction of wastewater, stormwater treatment facilities, and implementation of non-port source pollution control. Non-port source is typically agricultural and things of that nature. DEQ administers the program, so applications are submitted to DEQ. They go through the process, approve the applications, work with the localities through any type of issues while projects are moving on. The Virginia Resources Authority serves as the financial manager for the loan fund. These are the types of eligible projects: publicly owned wastewater collection and treatment facilities, publicly owned stormwater best management practices, typically known as BMPs, remediation of contaminated brownfield properties, land conservation, living shorelines, and agricultural best management practices. The general summary of the loan. Loans are made to local communities at rates equal or below current market rates. DEQ, after consultation with VRA, establishes interest rates. The city has to pay first, so it's a reimbursable program. The first payment when you're paying on the principal is 6 months after project completion, and then the loan terms are 20, 25, or 30 years repayment schedules are available. It's coming before you because the surety that backs up the loan is actually a bond. And so in January, it'll come before you a bond hearing, typically as you have in most of your bond hearings. As the city manager said, it's 2 bonds and the amounts are as shown. The stormwater loan is 0% interest. The wastewater loan is 0.5% interest. The city is required to pay the principal back over 20 years. A portion of the principal may be forgiven up to a specified amount. These are the current city projects that are in each one of the loans. The stormwater loan has 2 retrofit projects: the Court Street, Green Street project, the Beaton Sykes Level 1 wet pond, and then there are 5 wastewater projects in the wastewater loan, is in the second bond. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
This may be for the city manager or Mr. Wright. The bond that's being applied for and the projects that are being covered in the report back, there were some waste management facilities under the infrastructure bill. Are any of these overlapping with that, or is this something, are these projects separate?
These are separate, sir.
They are, okay.
Yes, sir.
All right.
The ones, these were applied for prior to the infrastructure bill
Okay.
being signed into law. And so the ones in the report back are all the ones that we have applied for since that bill has been turned into law.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You ready, Mr. Mayor?
You have the floor, ma'am.
Okay. Next on the agenda, we have our representative from Clifton Larson and Allen, Ms. Aries Coleman, and she will be giving a discussion on our annual comprehensive financial report, the ACFR. Ms. Coleman, welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, if you could bring the microphone closer.
Closer.
Yep, come closer. Yes, ma'am.
Is that better?
Yes, ma'am, it
Okay,
is.
great. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much.
Welcome.
Welcome, and thank you so much for having me today. As Ms. Chapman mentioned, that I will be presenting the results for the annual comprehensive financial report, which is called ACRA. It used to be called CAFR. About a year or two ago, the name was changed to kind of switch some letters around. So I am going to be presenting the results of the audit. Just kind of where we are now. The audit testing has been done, and the audit is now in our QC review process. And once it goes through our QC review process, it will be, we will issue the final opinion to the finance team, and then they're able to submit the ACFR to the state auditors of public accounts. All right. So what I am presenting today is not the, it's final as far as our auditing process, but we have not issued the final letter. So we always like to put that caveat there, because if something changes, just, you know, anything can change, and it changes the opinion, we want to state that as of right now, the opinion is not final. So for the 2022 ACRA for the city of Portsmouth, we are issuing an unmodified opinion. That means that this is the highest level of assurance that my firm is able to give on financial statements. And what does that mean? So that means when you get the ACFR, it's 280-something odd pages. It's probably like 8 hours worth of read. You have, you know, Flora and her team are really responsible for all that information. We have 3 pages. And the 3 pages basically states that the independent auditor is supposed to review that pages of 280-something information and test that to give reasonable assurance that it is done in accordance with general accepted accounting principles. So that's what we do. We have this, like the 3 pages we're in, and that means that we're giving an unmodified opinion on all that information through testing, inquiries. We may have met with some of you to ask some questions during the audit process. And we kind of finish that and we say, is it in accordance with auditing standards? And we give an unmodified opinion. And I like to sometimes make that distinction because we do not look at every transaction. So we give reasonable assurance, not absolute, which is required under auditing standards. So next I want to go and make some communications that are required for governance. So during 2022, there was a new auditing standard called leases. It has been discussed over the last few years. It's been also due to the pandemic. It was kind of pushed back for a while, but finally, lo and behold, for fiscal year 22, the lease standard has been implemented and is required for the city to look at how they are recording their leases. And what this is going to affect is leases that you normally had as operating. So your copiers, your rent agreements, if you're leasing cars. So what now is when the old standards for capital lease, where you actually put a liability on the financial records, or you put an asset on the financial records. So now there's no such thing as an operating lease as far as the accounting world. And what this did is it's a big undertaking because, one, it takes time to assess all of the leasing agreements that the city has as operating, and then assess if they need to be revalued under the GASB 87 standard. And with the city has lessor, meaning that there is agreements where you're receiving payments. You have lease agreements where you're actually receiving payments from individuals or companies. And then you're the lessee, where you're actually leasing equipment or building from others. So that is a lot. And the city, the finance team took time to talk with various individuals to get a handle on that, and then they determine a value, which is basically an estimate, and that is recorded in the financial statements. So that will be something new this year. When I talk about estimates, there are some numbers in the financial statements that are based on estimates. And what that means is you have certain assumptions that are made, and it forms the value of that number. So it's not a hard, I can't give you an invoice, or I can't give you something that actually support that exact number, but there are certain assumptions that are used to determine what that number is. And that's really going to be for your pension and your OPEB liability. As you know, these are done by actuaries, and actuaries are looking at, again, estimates. They're looking at the life terms of individuals. They're looking at salary, the expected increase in salary. And we call these estimates because they're projecting out what a liability would be in the future based on certain assumptions now. You also have a liability for your IBNR. You have the city is self-insured. And with that, there is, at year end, there are claims that have happened before year end that the city has not been charged for. So that is an IBNR. It's incurred but not reported. And the city does contract with a third-party firm to do that analysis. They look at trends, they look at data over the years, and they basically determine what is out there that the city has not been aware of that needs to be recorded at year end. And then the other allowance I want to talk about is the allowance on your utilities. Again, with the business type, you are charging persons for service, and there's going to be a certain dollar value that you're not going to get back. So what that happens is that you look at the trends over years, and we are averaging maybe 15% of what we bill we may not receive. The number may be higher than that, so I'm just kind of giving you an example. But what you do now is that the city is going to make an allowance. So we have $1 million that is due to us. We're going to allow and say we're not going to collect 15% of that. And that number is it could be sizable depending on what the collection rate is for the city. Couple other disclosures I want to make is as we go through the audit, we ask questions, it's communication. But at the end of the day, we did not identify any errors that need to be corrected by management. We also didn't identify any errors that management deemed immaterial and that was not corrected. We did not have any disagreements with management. Management will be required to sign a representation letter for the financial statements. And what that is that management is representing that all the information, documentation, inquiry, observations that were made by us based on management documents is true and accurate to the best of their knowledge. Management did not consult with any other auditors. And so what we look at that, we call it opinion shopping. As I mentioned, a new lease standard just came out, and there has been some governments and businesses that were adverse to it. And so what they may say is, oh, I'm going to go and try and see if I can get a new auditor, and if they will not allow me to implement the lease standard, I'll hire them instead of you. So management did not have any discussions with any other auditors on that. When you look at the financial statements, there are a couple of sections. The best thing I would tell for the person you're reading for the first time is called Management Discussion Analysis, and it's MDA, and it gives you a really broad overview of the activity for the city. It's probably the smallest section that you can look at. One of the other areas in the financials is called Required Audited Information, and this is information that is supposed to supplement some of the auditing information. For the city, it's going to be your budget to actual for your budgeted accounts, your budgeted funds. It's also going to be some supplemental pension, OPEB information regarding liability and your contributions. The other letter that we will issue along with the financial statements is called our government, is a government auditing standards letter, and it's over the internal controls over financial reporting. As part of our audit, we are not auditing the internal controls, but we do assess internal controls over the account balances that we are auditing to make sure that the controls are effective and are preventive or detective for errors and irregularities. As such, we are required under standards to issue a letter basically stating that based on reasonable assurance that we did not find any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in the internal controls related to the financial reporting activity. One thing I just want to leave everyone with before I'll take some questions is, so we are issuing the financial statements, the ACRA. The other report that's going to be required under APA is a report on your federal expenditures. Due to the pandemic, I think maybe 2 fiscal years ago, the APA actually changed the law to where the single audit, which is your federal audit of your federal expenditures, is not coupled with your financial report due to the burden that was placed on a lot of localities because of the pandemic. And so with such, usually, probably about 3 years ago, you had both reports issued at the same time. We will be issuing a report at a later date, hopefully early in 2023. That is my required communications, and I will open it for any questions.
Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. When do you anticipate it being finalized?
I would say, I would like, I don't want to go on record. I will hope before the end of the year. And I would say as soon as possible. And the reason why I have to say that is because now we have, as auditors, we have a QC process that has to happen before we're allowed to issue the report. So we have told the QC this is a priority. But again, until they give us the okay, I cannot tell you the actual date. But we have made it known to them that this is a priority to get done.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Madam City Manager, ma'am, you have the floor.
Yes, sir. Just a couple of announcements. Our Fuchsia system that we announced, the citywide camera system that was supposed to go live mid-December, has now been delayed by the company. They said that they were in need of us to share information about CAD integration, which is currently being done. Training is set for mid-January, and a go-live date is now in February. Mr. Mayor, that concludes my presentations and announcements for this evening. Would you like for me to proceed with the CMRs?
Well, thank you, ma'am. And are there any other questions from my colleagues? Then, ma'am, if you would, please proceed.
Yes, sir. CMR 22-366, an adoption of an ordinance accepting $35,837 of Community Development Block Grant Program income and $20,730 of Home Investment Partnership Program income, and appropriating it to the Community Planning and Development Program Fund. 22-367, adoption of an ordinance accepting state Homeland Security Program funding in the amount of $41,150 from the Virginia Department of Emergency Management and appropriating it towards the grants fund of the Fire, Rescue, and Emergency Services. 22-368, adoption of an ordinance modifying, approving, and affirming categories of expenditures for ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act funding. And just of note, we have one change in the categories that are listed as of probably a half an hour ago. We're in desperate need of a new 911 system and infrastructure, and so we're asking for that $1 million that was initially set aside for affordable housing to go towards our new 911 system, which we are told it's at its end of life. 22-369, adoption of an ordinance authorizing the transfer of $300,000 from the non-departmental categories of the FY 2023 general fund budget to the contractual audit line item in Finance Department for the purpose of conducting a forensic audit on ARPA expenditures and the general fund budget and an assessment of our public utilities billing. 22-370, adoption of an ordinance accepting assertive community treatment program funding in the amount of $750,000 from the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services to the Behavioral Health Care Services Fund to provide comprehensive mental health and substance use services. 22-371, adoption of an ordinance accepting state opioid response grant funding in the amount of $294,852 from the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health Care Services or Health and Developmental Services to the Behavioral Health Care Service Fund. 22-372, adoption of an ordinance accepting STEP Virginia funding in the amount of $227,308 from the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services to the Behavioral Health Care Service Fund. 22-373, adoption of a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute the memoranda of understanding with the clerk of the Portsmouth Circuit Court for the performance of audiovisual upgrades to the courtrooms in the judicial complex. Mr. Mayor, that concludes my report.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, to our city manager, I just want to make sure, when you, on 22-368, when you mention about $1 million from affordable housing to the 911 system, which million are you speaking of? The first allocation or this second allocation that we have before us?
It depends, because what we're adopting tonight is actually the first
Right.
allocation. The 1.2 million was from the second allocation that we adopted and we had set aside for affordable housing. But due to the necessity to have the 911 system, we're asking to reappropriate that category.
So the reappropriation is for the second allocation from that
Correct.
1.2?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
Did you have anything else, sir?
No, that was-
Okay. Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Chapman, can you elaborate any on the replacement of the 911 system? That's kind of a general statement. And along with that question, does this have anything to do with the, some complaints we've had about the answering of the system?
The complaints we received calls for us to have a meeting in reference to the 911 system. Our IT director is here. I know Chief Mangubat was going to talk about it during council meeting if any questions were asked, but Mr. Hayes, if you can come up, he did the assessment of the center, and so he can share some information.
Yeah, I think it's good for the public to know $1 million is $1 million. So, you know, if it's broke, if it needs to be replaced, that's one thing.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, to Councilmember Moody, what we've discovered is that the current infrastructure that you have for the 911 system that's in place today has pretty much reached its end of life. And there were recommendations for replacing that infrastructure in order to keep that system running. However, we also have a proposal to replace the existing 911 system, and that's the recommendation that we are giving, that you forego enhancing the infrastructure for this current system, which is pretty much obsolete, and go with this new proposal and software that we have that's pretty much standard across the region, where the same type of system that's used in other 911 systems or centers with some of the other localities. When you talk about priorities, we all know that our purpose and our function is dealing with the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens. And so we consider this a high priority to replace this system.
Oh, absolutely, that's a high priority. And, you know, other than being a working system, what enhancements will it have? It appears to me, just from what I'm hearing from people who are calling into 911, that response time is a big factor. The phone rings and hasn't been answered in a timely fashion. So the replacement will correct all of this.
It'll take care of those issues, plus there are mandates in regards to next generation 911 and some of the technologies that go along with that. It'll take us far into the future with regards to the performance of the system and to give us the capabilities to function appropriately.
What's the anticipated lifespan of the new system?
Obviously, anytime you have infrastructure and IT, et cetera, it will require updates, et cetera, some of the server equipment, et cetera. Life span may be in seven years or so, but at some point, you need to be planning also for upgrades in the future. When you make these type of investments, they're not one-offs. In other words, you don't make such a large investment and expect that that's it. Once you make these investments, you also should be planning for future upgrades as well. And unfortunately, where you are now, this current system and the infrastructure itself is pretty much outdated.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Councilwoman Lucasberg, ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Hayes, I guess the comparison between the Band-Aid on the current system and the cost of purchasing the new system, I mean, the $1.2 million that we're going to take from, or considering to take from this ARPA fund, is that going to cover all of the cost to purchase a new system, and how much difference is that?
So the current system, the recommendations that I've found in the documentation say somewhere in the neighborhood of about $300,000 to kind of shore up the existing situation without having some of the required E911 next gen technology that is supposed to be utilized in the 911 centers. This recommendation is over $900,000, which will take care of all of that, including hardware and infrastructure and the software and the systems that go along with it. There are a number of things that have contributed, in my estimation, to some of the problems that we're seeing, and they're infrastructure type of problems. There are latency issues in terms of when the actual signal and the call literally is reached and able to be acted on by our staff. And those are some of the things that would be replaced with this new type of system.
Right. And we would likely have to keep the new system going until keep the current system going until the new system can be implemented, and how long would that take to get up and running with that?
Yeah, so the new implementation, it sounds like they estimate roughly, give or take, 6 months in order to get this new system in place. However, we know that training, et cetera, is going to need to take place with our current staff. So taking in consideration all of those things, I would say 7 to 8 months or so.
Okay. I'm all on board for a new system. Definitely want to keep our citizens safe. But I guess, Madam Manager, I do have a question or concern because I think that $1.2 million was allocated to PRHA once we receive their unaudited financials. So I guess we as a council would have to determine where we would pull that money, because I'm still in favor of supporting PRHA with the request for that senior housing complex. So definitely want to do this new 911 system, but want to know how we allocate for PRHA as well.
You have the floor, ma'am.
Chief Manubot just came in. I know you probably ran up the stairs, but if you can explain the current process in the 911 system versus what the new process would do as far as answering calls.
Yes, ma'am. Mayor, members of council, I apologize, I rushed over here. So really, with the Next Gen 911, this is a movement that's been happening statewide, actually nationwide. So really, to go down to the phone system itself, our phone system is a legacy system. It was designed 30 years ago when there were very, very little cell phones out there. So with that, the system that we have with limited line capabilities coming in will get inundated by one incident. Example, the Saturday event that drew a lot of complaints. There were 4 major incidents: overdose, shooting, difficulty breathing, and incidents with police occurring within a 30-minute time frame. 38 phone calls entered the 911 center. the 911 center is only capable of 8 lines coming in for 911. What happens with the legacy system is that there's no tracking mechanism on whether these calls that come in are non-emergency or emergency. That is why there is a big push to upgrade the system to a more modern 911 phone capabilities that handles data, GIS information, cell phone, video, text, all of that. So where we stand today is that the liability is the fact that if we don't move from the legacy system, we will continue to have delays through the 911 system. Just a little bit of fact, over the past few years, 80% of the calls coming into 911 centers nationwide are from cell phones. If we go back 25, 30 years ago, maybe 10% of the population had cell phones. So that's where the inundation is. So our proposal to city manager with IT is if there is ever a time for us to fix this part of the infrastructure, this is the time that we'd like to do it.
Councilman Woodard, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief Manubot, I think you made an interesting point there as well. I think it's been a problem with our citizens trying to get in contact with the police officers or just paramedics in general through 911. They do revert back to calling the non-emergency number. So, you know, in details, you gave us exactly, I think, what the public's been looking for. Like you say, it's only been designed to take 8 calls at a time, you know.
Right.
So all of this stuff that's happening in Portsmouth, I think this is necessary to make sure that, you know, we can get the trained professionals to different incidents that's happening throughout our city. So, you know, I am definitely in support of this. And once again, I'm glad you gave that explanation. Also, Delegate Hayes as well, I appreciate you letting the citizens know just how important this is to our infrastructure, you know, and just the ongoing safety in Portsmouth. So thank you.
Yes, Mayor, if I could just respond on that.
Please, Chief.
Yeah, so when we look at the phone system and 911, you know, one of the things that I've tried to impress, especially to our dispatchers, is that we get a lot of complaints, especially social media banter, that blame the dispatchers for not answering the calls. But in reality, they are answering the calls. So what we've done as a stopgap is, as you're aware, about a year ago, we implemented emergency medical dispatch into the center. We were the only center in the state of Virginia that didn't have emergency medical dispatch for our citizens. So within those protocols, if somebody is being given life-saving instructions such as CPR to their loved one over the phone, a gunshot victim being told the caller to put pressure on the bleeding, all these life-saving events, we're going to continue the dispatcher to maintain that call. But we've implemented a series of calls where it's going to be called urgent disconnect protocol. So if they're just on the phone waiting for 911 or a responder to arrive, giving them comfort on the phone, we're going to implement the urgent disconnect protocol. That will free up that phone line so another line can be answered in that standpoint. So we're trying everything we can to free up those lines. One other area that we're looking at is, to date, 73,000 admin calls are coming into the 911 system. That being stated, a lot of them are property crimes, just issues that people believe 911 is the answer or the solution. We're also looking with the police department, IT, and the manager to implement software that will allow the citizens to report property crimes without using 911. The other area we're looking at is re-educating that 311 is a viable answer for people, and to push that out through marketing so that instead of clogging up the lines in 911, we continue to use 311. Trying to find that balance across the information sharing for the citizens And that's the direction that we're headed. Yes, just reminded by the manager, text to 911 came live earlier this year. That is also an alternative for a citizen to contact a 911 center if they cannot use a phone or call in on a phone. That alternative, and we're sharing that through marketing, is that a text to 911 hitting a tower in the city of Portsmouth will go straight to the terminal where the dispatcher is, set off an alarm, and they will be able to answer that call via text instantly. And that's live today. That's the other bit of technology that we're going to push out to the citizens as we move forward to upgrade the telephone system.
Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, the system didn't become obsolete all of a sudden, obviously. And it seems like the complaints of a few weeks ago, it kind of triggered this. Has anybody raised their hand and requested that the system, we look at replacing that? And I say that because I haven't, unless I don't recall it, I don't remember any requests in the past budgets that, hey, council, the 911 system's getting old, it's not keeping up with the demand, and we need to replace it. It seems like this is all driven by something that blew up just a week or so ago.
Yes, sir. No, this has been ongoing. The complaints that came through is part of that rehashing of, is it the dispatchers, is it staffing, is it the infrastructure, is it the phone lines, or what have you. So it's really all of the above. NextGen 911 has been being pushed through the IT department, like I said, along through the state agencies to upgrade all 911 systems within the nation. And there's so many different moving parts. Text to 911 is part of that. But as these phases go through to implement those, we feel that is a need, a very important need right now, hence some of the latest complaints that we've had to move forward and push this through. We've been dealing with IT and pushing this project through probably for the last 3 years since the fire department has taken over the administration of 911. But there have been, as you know, always competing priorities, funding, and also the project scope itself. I did find from June of 2022 a project scope for the continuation of moving the NextGen 911 system through via IT, and that project scope also includes this this part of 911 enhancements, and that project scope or plan is dated March 1st of 2022. So these have been working projects, and it's just that we just feel enough is enough. Let's fix the real problem.
Yeah, definitely enough's enough.
Yes, sir.
When you're talking about the safety of our citizens. But I was just curious where that was. It seemed like it just, boiled up. So obviously you've been aware of that for some time.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Councilman Woodard, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, I'll just say it has been a lot of events that's been going on throughout the area, throughout the country. So, I appreciate this proactive approach to make sure that we do enhance our 911 call system. I do got a question. I don't know if Mr. Hayes have checked this out as well. I know you just took on this position, but do our calls all come in through the tower that's located on our jail? That antenna, that I think all our calls come to those dishes or antennas that's located on our jail.
Yes, so are you talking about cell phone calls or
Where
just
our
the calls that come in
911 calls.
911?
Right.
Okay.
I think that's a major part in our
Right.
911 system. So I just got a question. Is this a part of that upgrade, or is that potentially make that obsolete? Because if we're having projects that'll be moving towards the future and possibly, that tower will have to be moved. So is
Right.
this something that'll help us out with, I guess, like I say, seeing what we can do, just upgrades for the future, I'll say.
Right, okay. I can touch up on the phone system, and then I'll ask Mr. Hayes to step up. The current phone system is kind of like a quasi-phone system where all the phone calls, especially the landline calls, are going into like a Verizon hub. And within that Verizon hub, depending on what provider that person is calling their landline from, depends on what type of delay there is to go from 911 to that hub per se, and then distributed back to our 911 system. That's part of the old legacy system that we're trying to mitigate or take that portion out of it. The 911 next generation phone systems and so forth is more data-driven, and it's more on the infrastructure of broadband and more high-speed network, and that's something that Mr. Hayes can talk about.
Thank you, Chief. To Mr. Mayor, to Councilman Woodard, the answer to your question about the cell tower situation, there are two ways, as you know, for those calls to come in 911, if it's a landline versus the cell towers. The Verizon switch that Chief is speaking in reference to, those calls will come in here, on the site here, or through a site in Newport News, if it's a landline call. If it's a cell call that's coming, that call goes to the nearest cell tower where the call is actually being made from. And then it'll come in to our, what we call, one of those lines that he's speaking to in this older type of technology. By today, we won't be dealing with, when we replace these through a limited number of lines, it'll come in through a SIP trunk. And so it'll be able to handle the number of calls that come in. Not only will it be able to handle the calls that are coming in, it'll actually hold those calls in a queue, and the individuals, as they're calling in, you won't have situations where the lines are just ringing forever until there's a free line. There'll also be a message that the person on the other end, they will get automatically to tell them, if you would please hold, the call is coming. We'll take your call as soon as possible. To kind of let them know that they have actually reached 911 and someone is about to take their situation. Because what we've seen also as a problem is, everybody doesn't call 911 every day, right? So they're not as familiar with what the process is going through, the average citizen. So sometimes as they call 911, they get frustrated within seconds. And so they'll hang up. And then they'll call back, not realizing what you've done when you hung up. You took yourself out of the queue, and now you're starting all over again in the queue. Now, to add even more complexity to that, a major issue going on, it's more than one person calling in about that issue. You might have 5 or 6 different people calling at the same time, trying to get in through those limited number of lines. Once we move to the SIP trunk technology, that's not going to be an issue any longer.
Thank you.
Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
So some of the problems that we were told that people were calling in, that if they were on a Verizon, they had Verizon as their carrier, was the problem on their end, but it seems like the problem was on our end. Was it limited to Verizon?
Again, Mr. Mayor, to Councilmember Moody, I'm unaware of any specific incidents, so it's hard for me to describe something that I wasn't aware of what has happened in the past.
Right.
However, again, there are a number of a variation of things that could have contributed to any one call. So it's hard to actually pinpoint and give a global answer to a lot of different scenarios that could
Right.
have existed. So.
Okay, thanks.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
Yes, Mr. Hayes, so now that we'll be able to accommodate more calls, does that mean that some of this million allocation will go towards increased staff?
Well, as far as I know, Mayor, Councilmember Whitaker, Dr. Whitaker, this allocation sounds like it's enough to take care of the hardware and software for the system itself. In terms of personnel, I'm not sure where that's being addressed. I know that there are extreme efforts to fill those roles in the 911 center, but just like all other positions trying to be filled, it gets a little challenging and competitive in the region where folks get trained and then they'll be recruited by some of the more, some of the other cities that might be paying a little bit more. I don't know what you do about that piece.
Right. So I understand the need for the upgrade in the software. So will the citizens at the same time still find some similar frustration of not being able to get to a person because of understaffing?
In terms of the staff, again, it's hard for me to answer that part. However, those technology issues
Right.
that are major that we're having, all of that will be gone away.
Well, let me ask, Chief, would that still be an issue?
Mayor, Dr. Whitaker. Yes, so we work shift work, so we have a minimum staffing model that we have. So currently with our vacancies, we seem to carry 6 to 8 vacancies throughout the year, even with continuous hiring. So one of the issues we found from 20 to 2021 was a lot of the big companies were hiring customer service and call takers that were paying more than a dispatcher in the city. So we were losing them with that. With this system, it's going to help with the workload, but as far as the staffing numbers and all that, we staff. If we're 8 short, we're going to staff with overtime or backfill from office staff to cover those phone lines on there. So we aren't asking right now to update or upgrade the staffing numbers with this project. We'd like to leverage the technology as we've done since 2019. We eliminated nearly 5,000 to 6,000 calls just by adding a piece of technology that took burglar alarms and fire alarms, that instead of the company calling the dispatcher, the technology or interface, when the alarm sounded, it went from the alarm company straight to the terminal, which alleviated a phone call and so forth. So we calculated about 5,000 or 6,000 less calls leveraging that technology. We're hoping when we get the new phone system, we'll be able to be more efficient. We'll have the ability to where people won't just be hearing nothing but the eternal ring. They will have options to answer if this is an emergency, to go up higher in the queue. If it's not an emergency, press another number, and it puts them lower in that queue. But it also gives a record to our dispatchers to understand which call would be the priority here. Right now, they go in a perpetual ring. They don't even know who's on the other line.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And once again, I can agree with my colleagues that the safety and security is the #1 priority of our citizens, and you guys and your teams seem to be on the front line of it, as well as the manager. So we look forward to the upgrades, and hopefully that will at least bring a better process to our citizens. But I think the education that you all gave to us today is critical, that we get that education out to the community so that they're as informed as we are. So thanks again, gentlemen.
Mr. Mayor.
Dr. Whitaker, sir, you have the floor.
My question is back to the city manager regarding the ARPA allocation that we were just discussing. So the 1.2 million that PRHA had requested, is that entire 1.2 going to this system or just $1 million?
Just $1 million, so we have 200 still unallocated if you all pass the resolution tonight.
Okay, so any recommendation for where that other 200,000 should go?
As of right now, my recommendation is to put it on the water tower, our sewer system. What did we add to it? I know we added additional funding, the sewer pumps. Sewer pump replacement, we put the balance there. We can use all the money we can get towards that system.
Okay.
But I know there's also, Councilwoman Lucas Burke is still interested, at least she indicated, somehow, finding some money for PRHA. But as of right now, because we had not included that 1.2 because PRHA had not provided the financials that were requested. And so that's the easiest avenue to move that money from so we can get this project started
Right.
with
And
the
so-
911 system.
And so I'm going to make sure I'm clear. The resolution that we're voting on this evening pertains to the first allocation since council had not
Correct.
voted on that yet.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Did you have any more items?
I don't, but just to clarify, the resolution we're voting on this evening has to do with the first allocation, but we've just added the 1 million from the second allocation towards the 911 system, so that's included as well.
Right, okay.
Okay, all right, thank you. That concludes my report.
Councilman Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. While we're still discussing 911, I think it'd be good, Mayor, if we'd get a salary comparison with 911 employees with some of our surrounding cities, as well the number of people in those departments.
Do we have a consensus from council to request that particular ask to bring that information back?
I'm sorry, I was right and I didn't hear the request.
So the request was, Mr. Moody had requested that we would ask the city manager to bring back a salary study report of what similar positions in the surrounding area are paying for 911 call centers, so that we can properly evaluate it and see if we may need to make some changes there, perhaps. Councilman Woodard, sir, you have the floor.
Sorry, I was agreeing with you, sir.
Okay. So can I get a show of hands if we're in agreement? Ma'am, if you could proceed forward with that request.
Yes, sir, we will handle it.
Thank you. We have now come to council liaison reports. Are there any council colleagues with a liaison report? Seeing none,
It's not a liaison report, but it's an additional follow-up.
sir, you have the floor.
At our November meeting, there was a discussion pertaining to the Sugar Hill property. And it was a request from you, Mr. Mayor, that colleagues be given time to go back and read the documentation, and we would come back with a discussion based on the proposal that I made as far as giving the property's history and what we have seen from the report from the city assessor as well as the city attorney, that those properties be returned back to those owners, given the significant involvement of the city in acquiring those properties properties in some questionable ways. Since our meeting, the minutes that were provided from council meetings, I believe dating back to 1924, all the way through to 2000, it gave clear indication that those properties have historically been targeted by the city for economic development. Also, the minutes indicate that that Sugar Hill area has been the recipient of environmental racism, given that the minutes reflect that the city allowed dumping to occur in that area, so much so that it was categorized as a slum. And we know that those that community was definitely under-resourced. And so I would continue to make this recommendation to our council that we direct our city attorney to move in a direction that those properties would be returned back to those owners or entity that represents those owners, as would be the fair and right thing to do. And I just wanted to see if there was some further discussion based on the documentation that we have received. I think it's an atrocity what happened to that community, not only with what the city did through tax liens, but also with what that community was impacted by with the Martin Luther King Expressway, which actually went through the middle of that city and was consistent with what had happened across other African-American communities across the United States, which has been well documented. And so I think that the right thing to do would be moving in a direction of justice and restoration.
Thank you, sir, and I think that was well stated. One of the points I would like to just add to your discussion, in when you had asked the last time about the information, I took the liberty of looking at the report back in detail that was presented by the city attorney and the city assessor. And, you know, I'm not in disagreement of the processes perhaps that had taken place, but as I read the document that was afforded to us, I still think that we need to move in a direction with providing more information on how, if we decide that that is the course we take to do that. And I think we need to rely on our legal department to bring that additional information back before we make a final decision. I think that's the prudent course to take. I think in the interest of justice and fairness, that is the best way to proceed, and I support that.
Right. And what I'm requesting is that council direct the city attorney to move in that direction. I think that the documentation that has been presented to us from both the city attorney and the city assessor gives a clear indication that there was some egregious acts being done by the city. Those properties were identified, and I believe we even read when the 320 Quebec Street was presented to us, it was read that that area was identified for commercial, industrial development. And so that there gave a trigger as to that there was something that wasn't being involved by the city to get those properties. And I think that now that it has been documented by both of our appointees of what occurred, that we at least direct the city attorney to move in that direction. That will require additional information, but at the same time, I think we should be clear that the direction we're moving toward is to restore those properties back to those owners. And so if that's the consensus that I was requesting at the last meeting, and respectfully defer to your request, because I think we did need to be educated and read up on the information.
And certainly, sir, I don't disagree, but one of the things that, and I'll ask the attorney to provide the direction we need to go in terms of, I just want to read something that leads me to believe that, yes, we need to have more information, and I think we need to ask the city attorney to move deliberately in the direction of providing information that will give us a clear way in which we need to proceed. And here is why I say that. If you look at page 8 of the document that was researched by our city attorney staff, it says the information previously provided by the assessor in his presentation to council also showed a variation in values compared to other neighborhoods nearby. However, he was unable to conclude disparate impact was evident in those valuations. Further research into the records recovered revealed little more than previously presented in this area. The assessor did, however, conclude there was an aggressive use of tax sales in Sugar Hill. So I'm not discounting the information, but I want us to move in a deliberate way and allow the city attorney's office to bring back that information that will move us in the direction that the information moves us in.
Right. And Mr. Mayor, I'm glad you read that statement where it says that, however, he, the city assessor, was unable to conclude if disparate impact was evident in those valuations. My issue was not based on whether those properties' valuations were at concern. Because I think the city assessor said that the valuation issue was pretty consistent with Shea Terrace. Mine is not a valuation issue. Mine is an enforcement issue, that the tax lien sale was used aggressively there on Sugar Hill versus Shea Terrace. And so I don't have any issue with more information because valuation is not the issue here. The issue is the enforcement and the use of tax liens disparately against those properties. And I think the evidence of it is that when you look at Sugar Hill today, it's just about gone. Shea Terrace is still there. And
Well, sir, and I don't disagree with you,
Yeah.
but I don't wish to debate it because I'm not a lawyer. So I would ask that our legal counsel, that we ask our legal counsel to move forward to providing additional information on how we will move forward in determining what the best course is to take to deliver justice and remedy whatever wrongs may have been done. So that is what I'm asking the city attorney to bring back.
The consensus that I'm requesting of council is somewhat consistent with what you're saying. It's just that I would like to make it a little more direct, that in gathering that information, it is for the purpose of returning those properties back to the owners or an entity that represents those owners. And so it's not just an information gathering so that council can make a decision. I think we have already been given information regarding the egregious nature of what occurred. Now it's just a matter of us moving in the direction to restore. And if that requires getting council more information, then yes, but it is moving in the direction of restoring those properties back to those owners.
Thank you, sir, and I think those are valid points. What I need the attorney to clarify, when you say restore the properties, we don't even know, and maybe the attorney can help us, these instruments or tools that were used in terms of, as you were saying, how properties were used with tax sales. Those, to my knowledge, were legal processes. To your knowledge, are those legal processes, ma'am?
Tax sales are legal processes.
So if it's a legal process, then I don't know that we have the authority to just say outright without understanding the legal process what we can or cannot do. Is that fair to suggest? Madam City Attorney?
I'm sorry, I think your question is whether it being a legal tax sale remedies what Dr. Whitaker is suggesting. That's for council to decide. What I can tell you is that the process is a complicated one. It will require a deep dive into a number of issues. We can be guided by the Bruce Beach, I think it's the first in kind return of property of this nature, and we can be guided by how that process proceeded. It was multi-step. It involved local government and state government. It involved an analysis of authority, in addition to the items that you two gentlemen are discussing. And so, once you all come to your consensus, my office will do what the will of council is.
Right, and let me just, because, Mr. Mayor, you raise a issue of it being legal, and I definitely don't want us to ever conclude that just because something is legal, that makes it right. I'm dealing with an issue of righteousness and fairness. We can look at this country's history and see that there were a lot of things that were legal, but it didn't make it right. You know, lynching was legal, but that didn't make it right. Slavery was legal, but that didn't make it right. And so I don't want to leave on a tone of thinking just because those properties were legally taken from persons who probably had a lack of resources to legally fight it, which we know in this city that if you have legal resources to fight things, there are different outcomes. And so I definitely don't want to leave on a tone that if it's legal, it's right. And that's why I'm saying we need to move in a direction of restoration and fairness, and that's the consensus that I'm seeking from our council members.
That is understandable, sir. And let me be clear to clarify that in moving in the process, we still have information that needs to be determined. And I think the responsible thing to do in restoration and fairness and justice is to take it through the proper process. And so I can support the legal team going and bringing back that information, taking a deeper dive into the information so that we can make the best informed decision based on the information that is provided to us. That is what I can support, and that is what, I'm willing to support. You have a request for a consensus, and if you would state your consensus again, if you would like us to take a vote on that matter, we can do that. But I think we need to keep in mind that there's still much information that we need to know before, but I do support moving forward and bringing all of the information forward so that we can make the best decision based on that information.
Right. And I agree with you on that. And so what I'm requesting is that council direct the city attorney to move in a direction of restoring those properties of Sugar Hill back to the rightful owners or the entity, with the understanding that council is in need of additional information as we move towards making that determination.
Mr. Battle, sir, you have the floor.
I'm a little older than most of you, and I was here during those eras, and the law wasn't applied equally to old folk. Today, the law is still not applied equal to old folks, and I want to go through the deep dive as well, but with the information that we have gathered this far, it's kind of evident that this did take place. So I'm definitely for returning the land back, and the deep dive is fine, but all indications of what I've read as well indicate that there was a nefarious situation going on, which is not uncommon, still going on today. And, you know, the problem with our society is we want to hide it. We want to make America perfect, and it's not, and we need to accept that. We need to accept that racism exists for some folk, but it's all about moneyism to the folk who are in charge. But anyway, I'm with you, Mr. Whitaker, about, you know, giving the land back to the proper folk.
Councilwoman Lucas Burke.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate the discussion, and I do have taken a in-depth look at the document as well, seeing where the properties were sold through tax sales. But I had a question that was lingering in the back of my mind that planning had mentioned that this was a flood zone area, and I guess part of the deep dive would be to determine who's going to mitigate the flood issues that are lying. I mean, if you're just handing over some properties to people that is in a flood zone, is any of that mitigation resource that we talked about with one of our vendors presented to us earlier in this year, are the resources going to be allocated to that? So there's still a lot of questions. Are you handing somebody some junk, something that they're not going to be able to repair or redevelop because it is in a flood zone? So that's the question in the back of my mind. Is it a flood zone? Are there going to be resources to fix that before you give them some land that they can't afford to even redevelop? Thank you.
Councilman Woodard, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that was my same question as well. I think we had a presenter who was actually trying to get us to tear down the home and whatnot, but it was, I guess, disclosed that it was a flood zone area. As far as my understanding is, from our last meeting, I thought we supposed to get more information on who the recipients is, and also we do have information that we do have to incorporate in our decision from our city assessor. I don't want to disregard anything that our city assessor's office done, and also our attorney's office as well. So, you know, I agree as well with Councilman Battle. At this point, we do have a lot of information. We do have some presentations, I think, that we can incorporate in the decision today. I just want to ask this question. I don't know if Mr. Wright can answer this, whatnot. Pretty much Sugar Hill is an undeveloped neighborhood, right? It's not too many homes over there. It's only empty parcels. So for our city attorney as well, will it be an easy transaction? Will it be the best way to give these parcels back to these recipients, mainly because they're just empty lots?
Well, first, thank you for your question. The neighborhood of Sugar Hill actually still has residents in it. There are a few,
Yeah.
for sure. There are also quite a few empty lots. The process is part of what the research we would do in terms of how this would happen. Can it happen? In what ways can it happen? All of these questions that you all present are the exact things that the office would need to look into and report back. It would be a tremendous amount of information, and I would suggest that we would maybe even have it as a regular topic on the work session so that we can take bite-sized approach to the information that you're going to be receiving. One of the things that's most significant in any sort of transaction is to whom does the property need to be given or belong. A lot of the reasons why we find ourselves in a situation where property ends up in the hands of other people is because of heirs' rights are not recognized as strong as they should be amongst our community. this, I think, is going to be an excellent opportunity to not only educate our council, but educate our communities about heirs' rights and the importance of protecting them into the future. And I think I'm looking forward to providing that information not only to council, but also to the community. So it's a long process, and we'll continue to do that.
Dr. Whitaker, you have the floor.
Yes, in regards to the flood issue that Councilwoman Lucas Burke raised, that flood issue, I think, is really not of great concern. That community has an organization called the Pennis Point Reunion, and I've spoken with several of them, and they have no recollection of Sugar Hill being a flood area. So I think part of the research that will be done would incorporate clarifying that, which people are still alive that can account for that. But even if it is, to what extent those persons still value the land. And so I think that's one of the concerns that they have. But, Ms. Mayor, can we move forward with the consensus?
I think I have another question.
Okay.
Mr. Moody, sir, you have the floor.
Well, Dr. Whitaker a while ago pointed out something that I agree with. Just because something's legal doesn't mean it's always right. But I think when we go to dealing with property and the city getting in a position to determine we're going to take property based on something that wasn't, we're assuming that wasn't right, but it may have been legal. I think the legal part is where we're going to have to defend it. And I think it could end up costing the city more money in suits, and may also establish a precedent where we're going to have to be very careful on what we do. So I think it has a lot of ramifications other than trying to correct something that may have happened that was wrong, even though it was legal. I don't think a present-day council can go back and correct all the ills and the missteps that were taking place, you know, in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, even 10 years ago. But I want to hear under what legal authority we will operate, because that's got to be the basis. It's not going to be the moral authority that's going to hold water in court. It's going to be the legal. What legal ground are we going to pursue this on? And that's what I want to hear. I'm not opposed to. I think we need to know that answer.
Thank you, Councilman Moody. That is exactly another layer of issues that we would have to look into as we present this information, is not only the legal basis for moving forward, but what ramifications they would have, and you know, what role the city plays in effectuating that. So that would definitely be one of the issues that would be researched and presented.
Mr. Battle, sir, you have the floor.
We're not trying to go back to the 20s. We can't bring the lives back that were lost through foolishness, of prejudices and things, and that's not what we're trying to do. We're dealing with a single issue, and that's what it is, a single issue. It's a lot of us up here have had things that have been done to us during our lifetime. We seek not to go back. We're talking about a single issue. But we do seek justice as often as we can get it.
And the last item, the last point I just want to say in this whole discussion, you know, I want to be clear that I believe that we should move forward in getting to the truth of the matter and what is and what has been done. And I want to ask one last question to the attorney. When we talk about moving deliberately forward in getting the answers to this, when we add language specifically that says return of property, does that bind us in any way without finding the truth and the answers to the questions? Perhaps that's a broad question.
It is a broad question. I think that's part of what the intent of the direction is. I think that language directs the intent council wants the appointee in her office to move forward. Does it bind? It's unclear. I think it depends on what's uncovered in terms of the ability to do so and what's out there in terms of allowing us and the steps we need to take. So it could bind. It is an intent of council. It is the will of council. It is the directive given. And I think what is uncovered will inform us with respect to that intent.
Thank you, ma'am. So the question before us in terms of the request for consensus is, Dr. Whitaker, would you like to restate your language, sir?
That we direct the city attorney to move towards returning the properties to the owners or the entity of Sugar Hill, with the understanding that there is additional information, of course, that has to be gathered. But I think the city attorney just clarified it very well, that what we're doing is giving a direction and is showing the intent and the will of council. And what the consensus that I'm requesting is that it reflects the will that we move in a direction. Given that we've received a report from the city attorney, city assessor, we move in a direction to return the properties that the city owns on Sugar Hill back to the owners or an ownership entity. That's the directive that I'm requesting.
Ma'am, if you could elaborate, please.
Could you also include the city manager in that directive? Because it's going to be important for me to have access to
Yes.
all departments as we are looking towards that intent. So if you could
Yes,
include
yes,
that.
city manager, city attorney, the city assessor. Yes.
We have the request for consensus on the floor. All in favor with that particular language, raise your hand.
Mr. Mayor, I got it.
Go ahead, Councilman Whitaker.
And this is just one question, this is for the city attorney as well. And this doesn't include any third parties, it's only, I guess, city-owned properties that we'll be looking at to return to different recipients of heirs towards these families.
It could include third parties because when you're dealing with heirs, you can have one heir, two heirs, 50 heirs. You could have ownership that involves a company. As you can see from the report, there were corporations who owned land since the beginning of Sugar Hill. And so there could be third parties involved in the process. But we are only talking about the properties of Sugar Hill, if that answers your question.
Well, I mean, legally, how would that?
That is the question. Yeah, that's what we would be looking into.
That's what I'm saying. We need.
Thank you.
So, once again, based on the request, we need a show of hands. Who want to support it? I see two hands. The ones who don't want to support it. I want to support it moving forward, but we need more information. I don't support it without bringing more information as we had requested in the beginning.
Well, yeah, I have no problems with the more information.
Okay.
You have to get more information.
Well, that's what we want.
I just want to make sure the direction.
We're moving it forward.
Right, so I'm in agreement with you. I don't think we're asking two separate issues. It's all in it incorporates the same.
Right, but before we talk about returning property, we have to have more information.
Well, we are moving in that direction. You can't return it without more information. You have to have more information. I don't have any issue with that. I'm just saying, we want to make sure that's the direction. We don't want to get here and start kicking the can down the road trying to decide what direction we're moving in. I think that justice requires that we move in a direction of returning it. That requires additional information. So I'm in agreement with you on that.
So we have the request for the consensus. All in favor of the consensus to move forward?
With your additional information.
With the additional request for information as we go down and go through this process?
Yeah.
Is that adequate, Madam City Attorney?
I only hesitate because it is the will of council. And so if you choose the language that you want to use and then get the consensus, and that will be my directive. And so it sounds like there are two schools of thought, or you may be on the same page. I just think if you just state with authority quite clearly what the intent is, and we will get the vote and move forward.
I think the intent was clearly stated. And so I think we just need to call for the consensus. So all in favor who wish to move forward, raise your hand.
Mr. Mayor, I had a question. I just had a question.
Go ahead, Councilman Woodard.
To me, it just seemed like we're asking the same thing. You know, I've been on that page, I think. What would change in the near future once we get the information if we all in agreement of that we intend to return this property if the information is adequate to do so?
It has to be.
You know, I think we're playing a word game with one term and one word. I mean, it seems like we're all asking the same thing.
Well, and that's a valid point. That's why I asked the attorney, because words do matter.
Absolutely.
And so I don't disregard what you're saying, sir.
So as I said,
Not
Mr.
at
Mayor,
all.
as I said, I'm asking that council direct the city attorney to move in a direction of returning those properties back to the owners or an ownership entity regarding Sugar Hill with additional information that will assist council in making that decision.
How about a compromise, since we're having a discussion? How about, and this is, we're still on this topic. Supposing after all this information and we've gone through all these processes and reviews, and it's determined that these properties were obtained legally, there was no nefarious stuff involved, perhaps, then how does that work? We're just talking, we're having a conversation.
Well, if you're saying that the city was not at fault and that there was no nefarious activity, then there would be no basis. But we have documentation from the city attorney.
I was just asking the question.
I know, and I'm answering it. We have documentation from the city attorney, the city assessor. We have council minutes from the 1920s that clearly indicates there was some nefarious activity going on and that there were some aggressive and disproportionate means used by the city in acquiring those properties. So it's not a hypothetical because we already have those facts. That's why I'm suggesting to our colleagues that we move in directing the city attorney to move in a direction of returning those properties. And I'm in agreement with you that we bring back additional information.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so it seems to me that the question should be reversed.
Right.
It should be that we should get the information first, And then once everybody is satisfied that there's no nefarious acts and that there's no flood and that there was no wrongdoing, then we proceed with the second part of your question to return the property. So the question first should be to direct the city manager, the city attorney, the city assessor, and all of the department heads or whoever needs to be on board to come up with the resolves to the questions that we've all asked tonight first. And then come back to us and say, these are the answers, these are the responses to the flooding. Yes, it is a flood zone, and we're not gonna give a dime to the people who are gonna get the money. They're gonna have to come up with that on their own. Because if that's the decision, I would be voting to not do that to someone, even though they value the property. There were some other questions on the line, nefarious activity, was it the 1920s law, so our direction to the city attorney first would give us the answers to these questions. And then we'll determine which direction we want to move on, whether we're returning it or if the city was actually in good faith to do what they did.
Councilman Woodard, Dr. Whitaker, then we're going to move on with the consensus. But I understand. And thank you, ma'am, for articulating that message. Councilman Woodard.
Once again, I think we all in agreement on how to move forward with this. I think for me, though, the legal portion is what we are all afraid of. I think the purpose is we do want to return these properties back, but we don't want to get into any lawsuits going forward. So I think the information is vital, but the purpose is also vital as well. But getting into any legal action is something that we just don't want to just ignore as we commit to the actions of returning these properties possibly in the future. So I think that's where we're at. I don't want to get into the flood zone thing. We don't want to count anybody's pockets. It is prudent information, though, Councilman Burke, but I think the legal issues is what we don't want to fall into, especially with third-party recipients or heirs or companies involved. We don't want to just say we're snatching property from these entities, whatnot. So the legal issues is what we're afraid of going forward. So I think that's what we need to incorporate into whatever motion or whatever decision going forward.
Dr. Whitaker, so you have the floor.
The information that is being requested to determine whether there was some nefarious acts or wrongful acts, we've already received that information. That information has been presented through the city council minutes from 1920s all the way through. We have that. So that documentation shows specific intent of council to acquire those properties for commercial development. Also, it's quite clear from the information we received from the city assessor that makes a note that there was a notable use of tax liens by the city to acquire those properties more aggressively than you saw in other areas of the city. It was used particularly in this black community, and it was not used as aggressively in Shea Terrace and other surrounding communities. We have that information. We have the information from the city attorney's report. So the additional information is not to confirm whether or not the city acted in a way that it should not have in acquiring those properties. It's not an issue of legal, it's an issue of was it right. And so, again, I am requesting of my colleagues a consensus that we direct the city attorney, the city manager, the city assessor to come back with language, come back with the procedure that we will acquire those properties that the city owns, that we will return those properties back to the owners or ownership entity of Sugar Hill. If additional information is needed by council, that's always the rightful thing to get.
Thank you, sir. And once again, I think we've talked this through, and I think we're all in clear understanding. So we need a consensus to direct the city manager, city attorney, city assessor to move forward with the language that was asked for. Those in favor, raise their hand. I see 3 hands.
It's 4 hands.
I see 3 hands. 1, 2, 3.
What's the other motion?
No, it's not a motion. It was a consensus.
Oh, okay, we come sense, yeah. We moving.
Okay.
It's 4.
You have the consensus count. You have your direction. Are there any other items to discuss at this time? Seeing none, this work session is adjourned. We will reconvene at 7 o'clock for the regular council meeting.